Welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 16 August 2020. Look at that, halfway through August. 3D keys, Emotet returns, FritzFrog, voice phishing, ICS, coffee cup magnets, and the Secret Service may be buying your location data. All this and more on the Security Weekly News wrap-up.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Hi, miss me? It seems like I was just here last night. I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University, your host, and welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up show. First, we'll wrap up all the show topics from this week. On Application Security Weekly number 117, Mike, Matt, and John had an interview with Cesar Rodriguez, who is the head of developer advocacy at Accurix. That's hard to say. Cesar demonstrated breach path prediction and other features of that product. On Business Security Weekly, number 184, Paul, Jason, and Matt talked with Jeff Koslow, who's a deputy the CISO at ExtraHop. Jeff was looking at something very interesting to me, Ripple 20. And Ripple 20, if you don't know, is a collection of 0 days and low-level TCP/IP that was developed by Trek. And the two main focuses of the attacks are on the IP protocol and on DNS. Jeff also discussed how ExtraHop will detect vulnerable devices in a quick demo of a solution that if you aren't up, I really like Ripple 20 in terms of it's something really to read up on. This segment might be a really good way to start out with that if you're not already familiar with Ripple 20. On Enterprise Security Weekly number 194, Matt and Paul had a news segment and then a micro interview with Chris Wasipal, sorry if I missaid that, co-founder, CTO, and CISO of Reversing Labs, and Mario Vuxon, the CEO and co-founder of Veracode. They were primarily discussing the modern digital objects and the level of complexity in these many layer things that we have now, and that all led to a discussion about how security really uses a different set of metrics to examine objects like this, and the embedding of security maybe doesn't match up very well, and that we need to align the objectives with the object developers so that security and object development go hand in hand instead of trying to apply security metrics to these very complex objects, and we all know how that's going. A second micro interview was with Danny Jeekins, the CEO of BitSight, and Stephen Boyer, the co-founder and CTO of ThreatLocker. The discussion on that segment was about the next evolution of the approach to working from home, with a specific focus on security of home networks and for employees and third-party contractors. And so this is obviously a big topic right now. Danny was primarily talking about his zero trust approach, so a great segment if you're supporting a lot of stay-at-home workers and people that are out there right now, trying to do that. Plus, you've got your third-party people working probably from home and so forth. On Security Weekly News number 57, Jason Wood talked about the Secret Service purchasing information and intel on the dark web, and I'll talk about that a little more later in the news segment. On Security and Compliance Weekly number 39, Jeff, John, Josh, and Scott talked with Matt Tarr, the principal solutions engineer at CyberArk. Matt was talking about something near and dear to my heart, which is the layers of security that need to surround privileged accounts. And I'm going to talk about that more as well. In the second segment, the crew talked about the importance of securing privileged access throughout the organization as it relates to overall security posture and compliance requirements. Really important stuff, seriously, and I'm going to talk about it some more. So please, that's probably one you want to listen to. On Paul's Security Weekly, number 663, Dan Perkins and Harry Sverdlov, the principal product manager and chief technologist at Zscaler, were on. Harry's always great. Dan was great. He was for his first time on the show. Johnny was quite taken with Dan's name, Dan Perkins, and is quite a fan of Parks and Recreation. So we had some back channel discussions about that. Dan also resembles a variety of celebrities from different angles. I was thinking Adam Driver in his photo, but the other people were saying John Krajewski. These two were talking about another of my favorite topics, Active Directory, and how you basically are totally screwed if any of these central Active Directory resources get compromised. Dan did a brief demo of their product Edgewise, and it was generally a fun segment with a lot of good discussion with Harry and a nice demo from Dan to talk about the just complexity of Active Directory and how everything is now interlinked. And when those things go down, or not down, but when they get compromised, you've got a big problem.
Dan Perkins.
Yeah. Somebody's saying something in my head. A second pre-recorded segment was another micro interview with Corey Thune, who's always great, the co-founder at Gravwell, and Daryl Hyland, who's the principal security research of IoT at Rapid7. So two great people who've been on the show, different shows quite a bit, and they're always fun to talk to. And maybe someday we'll get to talk to them again in person, so definitely worth checking out that one. The news segment was in the middle spot last night because of the pre-recorded segment, and we had a lot of fun. I'm always kind of surprised they allow me to keep doing it, but they do for some reason. So all that, and of course, the show was fun, and hopefully you watched and you enjoyed it. And if you haven't watched it yet, you can check it out later and see what all we were talking about. My favorite threat of the week is then going to be privileged accounts and privileged systems in that same regard. Look, we all do it, right? I mean, we run as admin, we run as root. I do it, you do it, everybody does it. One of my bad habits, the first thing I do when I get on my Linux system is, su. I hate typing sudo all the time and asking permission over and over and over again. But, that's what I should be doing. My system, these are not outward facing, of course. These are just me working on something. Worse still, what I've seen is we have collections of admins who are all running as domain admin or higher on the same account, or they're logged in as domain admin all the time. That's really typical, and you see that constantly. If you've never heard the word Mimikatz, then you probably haven't listened to Security Weekly very much or have been involved in the industry very long. But this kind of stuff is a huge threat. I mean, we worry so much about end users and endpoints, but the reality is these higher level users are internal. They have access to all sorts of resources. It's just amazing. And when I first started auditing some systems back for SOX, so when Sarbanes-Oxley came out back, in the early part of the 2000s, one of the first places I went after in these audits of large enterprises was looking at who is using this system and how are they logged in? And guess what I started finding? Domain admins, root, admins, even just end users as local admins. All these people can do immense amounts of damage, and most ransomware starts from this kind of privilege. But you would see these companies and they don't monitor it. They don't restrict it. They don't control it. And a lot of times the people who are responsible for restricting, monitoring, and logging and controlling it are the same people who are doing it. And they're saying, I have to be a domain admin because, I hate to have to switch accounts, and I'm like, okay, yeah, but didn't you just write a policy about that? I saw a company with probably 20 developers and maybe 5 network admins. Every single one of them were logged in as root. It was unbelievable. Now, they had a strong password, but they all shared it. I mean, every single one of them had the same password, and the password had not been changed in like 3 years. And so there were people that had rolled out of that group that were now working in other areas. We saw people logged in as root. I'm like, who is this IP? And they're going, I don't know. That's part of the marketing department network. Go over there. Guess what? There was a person who had transferred over to marketing who was in the web development group, and he's got the root password. He's logged in as root. We go over and ask the guy, why are you logged in as root? And he's like, oh yeah, it's just how I operate. He's like, it's just such a hassle. I'm like, okay. When I looked at the login records, there was people all over the place logged in as root, admin, and AD, Active Directory, is even worse. You go in and you go in and pull all these accounts and start looking at them and see how many domain admins are currently logged in on your system right now. Every one of those is a massive threat. How many people are local admin? And it's just terrifying. How many admins? People using actual admin logins on endpoints. It's crazy. If Chet down in VLAN Control used a domain admin account, CMAN, with the password BigDaddy45, that gets compromised on Senor Fufu. I was talking about that on the news this week before. But if that gets compromised on SenorFufu.com, and that same person uses the same credentials to log in as a domain admin, well, that's why the CRA in Canada was offline until Wednesday, because someone went and bought those credentials and they used them to log back into the system and get these levels of privilege. So it's really critical that you audit and log these accounts, and you don't allow anyone, including you, to generally log in as admin for day-to-day operations. That needs to be a switch. It needs to be logged. That way lies madness, I'm telling you. And most of us know this, but we still end up breaking these rules all the time. So, and you can't let everybody share a single account because A, then there's just no excuse for it, and B, you have absolutely no record of who put the botnet on the network. So people are going to abuse these credentials, so you've got to get this in your SIM. I used to use a trigger script on the mainframe that just looked for someone who typed SU, the equivalent. If you did that, you went right on my shit list, which I had to call the S list because I didn't want to offend any delicate sensibilities in the mainframe lab. But I guarantee you credential stuffing is real. And if you lose one of these accounts, you are going to have a lot more swearing that day than the S list report. So start auditing, tracking, and logging these accounts. Fair warning, because they're coming for you. And now all the top news. One quick note, this is actually a little bit dated, but I can't help but throwing it in there. Russell Kirsch died last week, if you didn't. And if you don't know who Russell Kirsch is, he was the guy who back in 1957 developed a 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter digital image scanner that captured the first digital image, which ultimately resulted in the invention of the pixel. And he was 91 years old. So good job, Russell. IBM announced that the EHS-8 module from Thales has flaws in it that could allow total control of any internet-connected device that has that chipset in it. So that means ICS, IoT, IIoT. The chipsets are used in billions of IoT, IoT, and ICS devices, and they were compromised by IBM's X-Force Red team. And this basically affects all of the Centurion EHS-8 M2M modules from Thales. There is a security patch, but there are literally billions of these things in industrial systems and other IoT devices sitting out there right now. And they're all vulnerable to this kind of an attack. So you need to figure out how to patch these things. And for some people, it's difficult to even figure out what they have in their ICS type scenarios, because for so long ICS sat there with that attitude, nobody can get to Purdue level 01, that all that stuff's locked off, it's walled off, nobody can ever get to it. But today you see these things being connected to the internet. People put in actuators that are connected to the internet so they can be updated or report back or whatever, and you get in a lot of trouble. Speaking of ICS, UC Irvine researchers found that they could disrupt electromagnetic components found in solar inverters. So the inverter on solar panels is what converts that into the grid. Basically, they hit an electromagnet in a coffee cup, and they were able to use the EMI being thrown from that electromagnet to disrupt the frequency of the inverter. So in different countries, they have different frequencies for their electrical grids, and if you can cause that frequency to be disrupted or changed, you can actually create a lot of problems. all those inverters, well, guess what? One of the big sales pitches of solar is that you can attach your inverter to the power grid, and you can actually sell power back to the grid if you generate excess power. Well, guess what? If this disruption goes on, the article goes on to talk about how it might be possible to attack a power grid using this kind of technique. Now, this attack was based on 19th century technology, and it did require that they get the coffee cup close enough to the inverter to actually interfere with it, and they did have to trigger it with Zigbee or something. I think they were using Zigbee, but you could use Bluetooth or whatever. So that means it was not an attack that, at the moment anyway, is something you could do widespread. I guess maybe you could. But it's still very much a lab project in this article in terms of threat, but it definitely illustrates the danger of these types of attacks, which are starting to become more prevalent by nation states and others out there. FritzFrog is a peer-to-peer botnet that uses a worm written in Golang, which is difficult to detect because it doesn't really leave a fingerprint after it runs. The worm creates, at least in its initial instantiation, creates a backdoor public SSH key, which means that an attacker can come back later and log into the machine using SSH. The worm's long gone, but the key persists. But the thing about this particular botnet is that the worm itself is a modular framework. So this is this thing we keep talking about, a la, say, like Emotet or something like that. And it can actually be used to drop just about anything. Most of these modular frameworks use a command and control server, and you can put things in the directories of the command and control server, and the worm itself will reach out and pull those things down. So in the end, this thing could be a lot like another Emotet version. Currently, it seems to be primarily being used to drop crypto miners. Sorry, excuse me. Phishing takes an old approach, simply calling people as a means of pushing out attacks by using a combination of phone calls and phishing pages to capture VPN credentials from workers at home. Our awesome friend who's been on the show many times, Allison Nixon, was quoted in the article. The attack seems to be focused on financial, telco, and social media currently, but it is a tried and true tactic. If you've ever heard me tell the story, the sad tale of Ethan Allen at some con or something, that was one of the very first approaches that I ever used to try to, it was white hat, but to try to break into a bank. And it worked like a charm, just calling people and getting them to give you things. This takes it a step further, getting them to go to a link and surrender their VPN credentials. Even though today a lot of people don't do phone calls, due to the fact that everybody's working from home, a lot of people are picking up their phones again because they get a call and they say, "Oh, I better answer because it might be work." The secret, also, I've been picking up the phone more simply because somebody else in the house is doing like a Zoom meeting or something, and I'm like, oh, I don't want the phone ringing for them, so I'll just answer it. I usually don't say anything, I just hang up. But the Secret Service bought phone location data from apps based on a contract. So the information that this was going on was based on a contract obtained by Motherboard through a public records request. The contract involved the sale of licenses for a product called LocateX, which was made by Babel Street. U.S. Customs and Border Protection were purchasing LocateX licenses, and a former employee indicated that the Secret Service was using the technology. Apparently, they were collecting location data. It kind of makes sense. I mean, if I want to know where somebody is and I want to, find out their current location, well, here's a tool that will get it for you. This is a complicated issue for law enforcement in the United States. I don't really know about what the rules are on this. I know the GDPR in Europe has a lot of restrictions on what they can do, but it's unclear in the United States if a warrant would be required to use this data since it was publicly obtainable. My guess is LocateX had you agree somehow. I mean, you may not even know you're using LocateX because you're using something else. But if you're using LocateX even indirectly, you probably at some point had an agreement that allowed them to collect your location data and sell it. Law enforcement went out and they legally did a transaction and purchased publicly available data to anyone who wants to buy it. So there you go. Is it legal? Well, the Secret Service has a lot of lawyers, and the Justice Department has a lot of lawyers, so I'm guessing they probably figure they're okay on that. Marriott is facing a lawsuit from the UK, London in particular, based on the massive data breach that occurred between 2014 and 2018. At least 7 million of the 300 million plus items that were in the breach were people from London. And the city has filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of the victims. So this is sort of an interesting development in breaches. And we're seeing that more and more where people are breached. And if they have local laws that say reporting is required or there must be penalties or whatever, you're seeing class action lawsuits. So those kind of damages will probably start making companies at least think about this a little more. Microsoft made an out-of-band patch available to address two flaws in Windows 8.1 and Windows Server 2012 R2 this week. These were for CVE 2020-1530 and CVE 2020-1537, which were two serious bugs in the Microsoft platform. Microsoft encouraged downloading and installing these patches as soon as possible, but the patches were not. And this is the reason I put it in the news. The patches were not included in the August 2020 update, so they were only out of band. So if you're using those platforms, you do not get these patches automatically, so you need to go download them and put them in place. Emotet had been missing, but it's back. A lot of people wondered why Emotet went missing earlier this year. Emotet is a very popular framework dropper for ransomware or whatever you want to put on the command and control server. And it will embed those things in this very fancy modern framework of the old version of the Emotet. However, due to the discovery of a buffer overflow vulnerability in Emotet, James Quinn from Binary Defense was able to develop a kill switch that he called EmoCrash. And he was running that and had shared it with only a select group of defensive professionals. I don't know who the group was, they didn't say. But these professionals apparently were running this EmoCrash version that causes Emotet's installer to actually crash. That had been effective in keeping Emotet from operating since, I think, February or maybe January of this year. But on August 8th, Emotet rolled out patches for Emotet, and the kill switch no longer worked on the new version. So expect a resurgence of Emotet. The report indicated that 250,000 spam emails were sent out by Emotet the day after the patch. So, you know, they're back. So if you love Emotet, and we all love Emotet, well, guess what? It's back in business. Well, we still use keys, right? And by keys, I mean those metal things that you stick into into locks. Yeah, keys were invented, supposedly, keys were invented in Babylon about 6,000 years ago. And they haven't changed much since then. I mean, you know, yeah, they got different designs, and they're smaller. They're not necessarily made out of, like, you know, the jawbone of an ass or something that I don't know what they made keys out of in Babylon. But they are likely, they're probably even older than that would be my guess. But we still use them as a primary means of physical security. I mean, you probably have some keys with you right now. And that technology hasn't changed very much. Well, throughout history, lockpicking, the minute somebody invented a key made out of the jawbone of an ass, somebody made a lockpick out of whatever they was remaining laying around on the ground. Key spoofing, just simply using bump keys, using other techniques and making fake keys, and all those techniques have been going on since essentially the dawn of time. I mean, I'm sure some primitive James Bond was out there picking their way into a hotel room or something back in ancient Babylon. But today, a technology called SpyKey uses, or maybe just SpyKey, I don't know, SpyKey uses basic smartphone recording technology paired with a signal processing unit, which is already built into the phone. And you basically can listen to the time gap between the tumblers touching the key and the tumbler falling into the gap. And that software then allows you to determine the shape of the key. Well, if you have the shape of the key, you can literally take a 3D printer, print the key on a 3D printer, and shove it into the lock, and boom. If you remember the wax key blanks, which is one of the big components of the Great Train Robbery, novel, and there was a movie made from that too. You kind of get the idea. And that is the news wrap-up for the week of 16 August 2020 in the time of plague. I'm Doug White from the already online cybersecurity program at Roger Williams University. I will see you next week on the network that never sleeps, Security Weekly. Read the science and stay safe. Thanks.